question neither could escape. Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared with love in dreams. That sentence was written by a Russian novelist 1 year before his death. 24 centuries earlier, on the other side of the world, the Buddha was teaching something that rhymes with it. That real compassion is a discipline, not a feeling. That it has to be maintained when the warmth is gone. When the person in front of you is not the one you wanted to love. Near the end of one of the greatest chapters in world literature, an old man delivers a 90-minute speech to Jesus. Jesus says nothing. At the end, he approaches the old man in silence and softly kisses him on his bloodless, aged lips. That is the whole answer. You already know this feeling. You have loved humanity in the abstract and found the person in front of you unbearable. Father Zosima knew it, and so did the Buddha. Tonight, what would the Buddha have said to Ivan Karamazov? The answer is stranger than you would expect. Chapter 1. The Man. Before we go to Ivan Karamazov, we have to go to the man who wrote him, because Dostoevsky did not theorize about suffering. He walked out of his own mock execution and spent 4 years in shackles. When he writes Ivan's question, how can a child suffer in a world made by a loving God? He writes it from inside it. And when he writes Father Zosima's answer, that love in action is harsh, dreadful, and the only thing that matters in the end, he writes that from inside it too. On the morning of November 16th, 1849, in a St. Petersburg prison, Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky was read his death sentence. He was 28 years old. The charge, participation in a literary circle that had discussed banned political philosophy. The sentence, execution by firing squad. He waited 6 weeks. On the morning of December 22nd, 1849, he was taken with 20 other prisoners to Semyonovsky Square. It was freezing. They were forced to wait in the cold, while the death sentences were formally read aloud, a procedure that took nearly half an hour. Then white death shirts were issued. Swords were broken above their heads, an old Russian ritual of stripping civil rights. The first 3 prisoners were tied to the stakes. Dostoevsky was in the second group of 3. He had, by his own later account, no more than a minute left to live. In that minute, he was thinking, what would I do if it turned out I did not die? What would I do with every remaining moment of consciousness? A drum roll. A rider arrived with a reprieve from the Tsar. The whole execution had been staged. It was psychological torture, ordered by Nicholas I, intended to break the prisoners before their actual sentence. 4 years of hard labor in Siberia. One of the prisoners, a young man named Nikolai Grigoryev, never recovered his sanity. He spent the rest of his life in a state of permanent psychotic break, broken by 60 seconds at the edge of a death that did not come. That same evening, Dostoevsky wrote a letter to his brother Mikhail. He wrote, "Life is a gift. Life is happiness. Each minute could be an eternity of bliss. We begin here for a reason. We are reading a Russian novel tonight, alongside the teachings of the Buddha, because a great novel can sometimes illuminate the human condition in ways that direct teaching cannot reach, not because the novel proves the Dhamma, not because Dostoevsky anticipated the Buddha, but because a writer who has stood in front of a firing squad has a kind of authority over the question of suffering that no second-hand argument can match. Dostoevsky is a second instrument examining the same human facts the Buddha examined. Tonight we are listening to both. In January of 1850, Dostoevsky was transferred east. At a transit prison in the city of Tobolsk, The prisoners stopped for several days. Living in that town were the wives of the Decembrists, Russian noblemen who had attempted an uprising against the Tsar in 1825. The wives had followed their husbands into Siberian exile. They had been there for 25 years. When they heard new political prisoners were passing through, they came to meet them. Among them was a woman named Natalia Dmitrievna Fonvizina. Fonvizina gave each prisoner a copy of the New Testament. It was the only book they would be allowed during their years in the labor camp. Inside the binding of Dostoevsky's copy, she had hidden a 10-ruble note. He kept that copy of the New Testament under his pillow for the next 4 years. The labor camp was at Omsk in western Siberia. He was in chains. He shared barracks with men he would never have met in St. Petersburg. Serfs, peasants, military deserters, murderers. For the first time in his life, he was not inside the intellectual class of Russian society. He was inside the people he had spent his early career writing about from the outside. He read the New Testament. He listened. He survived. In January or February of 1854, shortly after his release from the camp, but still serving compulsory military service in Siberia, he wrote a letter to Natalia Fonvizina that has become one of the most quoted passages in his biography. He wrote, "I am a child of this century, a child of disbelief and doubt." And he wrote that he had assembled for himself a creed in which everything was clear and holy. That creed was simple. There is nothing, he wrote, more beautiful, more profound, more sympathetic, more reasonable, more perfect than Christ. And then the famous extension, if it could be proven to him that Christ was outside the truth, and if the truth really did exclude Christ, he would rather stay with Christ than with the truth. His biographer, Joseph Frank, is careful to note, this was not a conversion in any single moment. The Siberian years were a slow transformation, but the Credo letter is the documented hinge. The moment we can name when he committed himself in writing to the figure of Christ as the center of his moral imagination. The rest of the biography is more familiar. He was released from compulsory service in 1859. He returned to writing. He developed a catastrophic gambling addiction in the casinos of Wiesbaden and Baden-Baden, pawning his clothes, writing desperate letters home for money. In 1866, under terrible deadline pressure, he dictated an entire novel, The Gambler, to a young stenographer named Anna Grigorievna Snitkina. He married her the following year. She saved him from his creditors and, by most accounts, from himself. He suffered all his adult life from temporal lobe epilepsy. In his novel, The Idiot, he gave his protagonist Prince Myshkin the same condition, and gave Myshkin an ecstatic aura before the seizures, a strange certainty that life was good. Modern neurologists have suggested Dostoevsky was describing his own experience through Myshkin. We cannot be certain, but we have, in The Idiot, the closest thing Dostoevsky ever wrote to a description of what those seconds felt like from inside. He spent the last years of his life writing The Brothers Karamazov. It was published in monthly installments through 1879 and 1880. It was, even in his own time, recognized as his masterpiece. He completed it in November of 1880. He died 2 months later, in January of 1881. He was 59 years old. He did not theorize about suffering. He reported from inside it. And when he sat down in his last years to write a novel about the question of God, about whether innocent suffering can be reconciled with a benevolent universe, and about what compassion actually requires from human beings in a world full of unredeemed pain, he was writing from inside 2 answers he had lived. The answer of Ivan Karamazov, who looks at the suffering of children and refuses to accept it, and the answer of Father Zosima, who looks at the same suffering and stays. Both were Dostoevsky's. Both came out of Siberia. Both are in the book. Chapter 2. The Rebellion. Of the two answers Dostoevsky brought back from Siberia, the first one in the book is Ivan's. This is important to remember. We tend to think of Father Zosima's active love as the moral center of the brothers Karamazov. And it is. But Dostoevsky did not give Zosima the first word. He gave Ivan the first word, and he gave him the strongest possible case. In Book 5, Chapter 4, the chapter titled simply Rebellion, Ivan has invited his younger brother Alyosha to a tavern. Alyosha is a novice at the local monastery, a student of Father Zosima. Ivan is 23, a graduate of Moscow University, a published essayist, an avowed rationalist. He loves his brother. He wants to be understood before they go their separate ways in life. He has been collecting newspaper articles, stories of cruelty to children. He has them with him. He reads them aloud. This is one. There were parents, well-educated, cultivated people of good Russian society, who had a daughter, 5 years old. They hated her. They beat her. They smeared her face with excrement and locked her in the freezing outhouse at night because she had wet the bed. The mother stuffed her mouth with feces so the child could not cry out. And the child, Ivan says, looking at his brother, the child, in that freezing dark, beat her small chest with her little fist and cried out sobbing, to dear kind God to protect her. To dear kind God. He looks at Alyosha. Do you understand what that means? He asks. Do you understand? He reads another. A serf boy, 8 years old, who accidentally lamed the hound of a Russian general. The general had him stripped naked at dawn and torn to pieces by his pack of hunting dogs in front of the boy's mother. Then Ivan sets the papers aside. He says, Alyosha, I am not arguing that God does not exist. For the sake of this conversation, suppose he does. Suppose, at the end of all things, there is the harmony the believers promise. Every tear wiped away, every wrong made right. The mother of the torn boy embraces the general who killed her son, and they cry Hosanna together, and the universe is reconciled in love. Ivan says, I cannot accept it. He says, even if it is true, I cannot accept it. The price is too high. No future bliss can be paid for with the tears of one tortured child. The arithmetic does not work. It is morally wrong. And so, it is not God that I do not accept Alyosha. Only I most respectfully return him the ticket. And again, I do not want harmony. From love for humanity, I do not want it. Listen to those last words. From love for humanity. He is not rejecting harmony out of cruelty. He is rejecting it out of fidelity to suffering. He will not accept a heaven built on a child's tears. This is the first answer Dostoevsky brings back from Siberia. He has been in the camps. He has seen what human beings can do to one another. And he refuses the accounting. Alyosha, the novice monk, the student of Zosima, sits in silence. He has no answer. Then Ivan says, I have written a poem. I have never put it on paper. I keep it in my head. Let me tell it to you. It is called The Grand Inquisitor. Seville, 16th century. The day after 100 heretics have been burned at the stake. Christ returns, quietly, in his old form, as himself. He walks through the city. He heals a blind man. He raises a child from the dead. The crowd recognizes him. They follow him. The Grand Inquisitor sees him. An old man, almost 90, tall and erect, with a withered face and sunken eyes, in which Dostoevsky tells us there is still a gleam like a fiery spark. The Inquisitor orders the guards to arrest Christ. The crowd, accustomed to obedience, allows it. Christ is taken down into the dungeons of the Inquisition. That night, the Inquisitor visits the prisoner alone. He carries a lamp. He sets it on the table. He looks at Christ for a long time without speaking. And then he begins. His charge is, fundamentally, this: you came to give humanity freedom. And freedom, he says, is the one thing humanity cannot bear. He breaks his case into 3 parts. They correspond to the 3 temptations of Christ in the wilderness. The 3 offers the devil made during the 40 days of fasting. The 3 things Christ refused. The Inquisitor says he should have accepted them. First, turn these stones into bread. Christ refused, because man does not live by bread alone. The Inquisitor says, but they do. They do live by bread. And by giving them bread, you would have given them obedience. You would have made the loaves the proof of your authority. You refused, and so they trade their freedom for bread anyway. But to other masters who do not even have bread to give them. Second, throw yourself from the temple, and the angels will catch you. Christ refused, because he would not compel faith by spectacle. The Inquisitor says, but spectacle is what they need. They cannot live by naked faith. By refusing to come down from the cross when they mocked you, you condemned them to a faith they could not sustain. Third, all the kingdoms of the world will be yours if you bow to me. Christ refused, and the Inquisitor says, and so we have taken up the authority you refused. We have founded the universal kingdom you would not found. We have unified humanity in a faith you would not let us unify them in. He sums it up. There are 3 powers, he says, 3 powers alone, that can conquer and hold captive the conscience of these impotent rebels. 3 things they cannot live without, and that he, the Christ, refused to give them: miracle, mystery, and authority. And then the verdict, quiet, almost weary. Tomorrow I shall burn thee, Dixie. Through the whole 90-minute speech, Christ has said nothing. The Inquisitor waits, Dostoevsky writes, for some answer. However bitter, however terrible, some word. The prisoner, who has listened in silence, suddenly approaches the old man in silence and softly kisses him on his bloodless, aged lips. That, Dostoevsky writes, is all his answer. The old man shudders. His lips move. He goes to the door, opens it, and says, "Go, and come no more. Never, never." And he lets him out into the dark alleys of the town. The prisoner walks away. When Ivan finishes telling the poem, Alyosha sits in silence for a long moment. Then he stands up. He goes to his brother, and he softly kisses him on the lips. "Ivan, that's plagiarism. You stole that from my poem." We will return to that kiss in chapter 4. For now, hold the question Ivan has put to us. Suffering is real. No theological balance sheet can settle it. And the only answer the religious imagination has given, Christ in silence, kissing his accuser, is precisely the answer that cannot defend itself in argument. The Buddha was not in that Russian tavern, but he was, in his own way, 24 centuries earlier, on the other side of the world, confronted by the same question Ivan is asking. That is where we go next. Chapter 3: The Buddhist Response. The Buddha's first sermon, the first formal teaching he gave after his awakening, was about suffering. This is worth pausing on. Of all the things he could have started with, he began here. Not with the existence of God, not with the structure of the cosmos, not with what survives death, or who created the world, or why. He began with dukkha, the first noble truth. There is suffering, birth, aging, illness, death, the presence of what we do not want, the absence of what we do, the 5 aggregates of clinging, body, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, themselves the field where suffering arises. This is the same fact Ivan saw. The fact of dukkha is not the Buddhist special discovery. It is the starting condition of being human. Even looking at the children was looking at the same thing the Buddha was looking at. He was not seeing something the Buddha had failed to see. What changes between Ivan's response and the Buddha's is the next step. Ivan, in the tavern, holding the newspaper articles, demands an account. Why? Why is this allowed? Who, if anyone, is responsible? What justifies it? Until that question is answered, the moral universe is in suspension. He will not move from his refusal until he has received an answer he can accept. The Buddha takes a different path, not because he denies the seriousness of Ivan's question, but because he sees something inside the question itself that, in his teaching, prolongs the suffering it is asking about. There is a sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 63, the Kula Malunkya Sutta, MN 63, where a monk named Malunkyaputta comes to the Buddha with a list of unanswered questions. Is the world eternal? Is it not eternal? Is the soul the same as the body? Different from the body? Does a fully awakened being exist after death? Does he not? Does he both exist and not exist? Malunkyaputta says, "If you do not answer these for me, I will leave the holy life. I cannot continue without knowing." The Buddha replies with an image. Suppose a man were wounded by a poisoned arrow, and his friends and family bring a surgeon, and the man says, "I will not let this arrow be drawn out until I know who shot it. Was he tall or short? Of what caste? From what village? What kind of wood was the shaft made from? Were the feathers of a vulture or a hawk? What kind of bowstring was used?" The Buddha says, that man would die. He would die before the answers came. This is the moment where the Buddha and Ivan separate. Ivan is the wounded man, insisting on the answers before the arrow comes out. The Buddha says, the arrow is in the wound. The question of who made it can wait. This is not evasion, it is a redirection. And the redirection is the entire path. The Buddha is not telling Malunkyaputta that the questions are unworthy. He is telling him that the demand for those answers, made the precondition for relieving suffering, will prevent the suffering from being relieved. There is a temptation to hear this as a kind of pragmatism, as if the Buddha were merely saying, let us be practical, let us not be distracted. But it is more than that. In Dikha Nikaya 1, the Brahmajala Sutta, DN1, the Buddha gives a remarkable analysis of the question of a creator. He explains how the belief in a creator God arises. In a re-evolving cosmos, the first being to come into existence in a new world finds himself alone. Other beings appear afterward. He concludes, wrongly, that he is the eternal creator and that they are his creations. The later beings, looking up at him, conclude the same thing. The Buddha does not say this God does not exist. He says, this is how the belief arises, and it is a wrong view to hold. In Anguttara Nikaya 3.61, the Titta Sutta, AN 3.61, he goes further, but still carefully. He examines 3 views that explain everything that happens to a person, that it is due to past action, that it is due to a creator God's design, or that it is due to no cause at all. He critiques all 3, but his critique of the creator view is not that it is metaphysically false. His critique is ethical. If a man holds that everything that happens to him, including his own actions, is the act of a creator God, then he has no reason to do what should be done and to abstain from what should not be done. The view destroys the basis for moral effort. This is the closest thing in the early Buddhist canon to engaging Ivan's question. The Buddha is not an atheist polemicist. He does not stand opposite the believer and shout, "There is no God." He says, "Hold this view and you will not act." And he wants the man with the arrow in his side to act. So when Ivan, in the Russian tavern, demands cosmic accounting before he will accept the order of things, the Buddha would not, I think, argue against him. He would say something more disquieting. He would say, the demand itself is a form of suffering. The insistence on metaphysical justice before practical action is one of the ways the arrow stays in the wound. There is one more piece of this that has to be in the room before we can move on. The Buddha's teaching of dependent origination, paticca samuppada. In Samyutta Nikaya 12.20, S and 12.20, he says that whether or not Tathagatas, fully awakened ones, arise in the world, this property stands. The regularity of the Dhamma, the orderliness of the Dhamma. Suffering arises from conditions. It is not anyone's intention. It is not anyone's negligence. It is the lawful behavior of conditioned things. This is, in a sense, the answer Ivan was not expecting. He had been arguing as though the suffering of the 5-year-old must be either justified by a benevolent God or charged against a malevolent one. The Buddha says, there is a third reading. The conditions that produce the parent's cruelty, the conditions that produce the child's birth into that house, the conditions that produce the freezing night and the locked outhouse, these arise from causes that are not metaphysical in Ivan's sense. They are not anyone's will. They are not anyone's failure. They are the impersonal mechanics of a conditioned world, in which beings without wisdom act out of greed and hatred and delusion. And what they do produces suffering in themselves and in those around them. This does not, and this is the precise place where one must speak carefully, make the suffering any less terrible. The child's anguish is not lessened by the Buddha's account. Her tears do not become more bearable because they arise from conditions rather than from God's will. The Buddha is not consoling Ivan by metaphysics. He is doing something else. He is removing the metaphysical question from the path, not because it does not matter, but because the path is what releases suffering, and the metaphysical question, when made prior, does not. And then, having done this, the Buddha turns to what actually does release suffering, to practice, to the long, daily, often unglamorous training of the heart and mind. There is a sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 21, the Kakachupama Sutta, the simile of the saw, MN 21, that gives us the most extreme image in the entire canon for what this practice looks like under pressure. The Buddha tells his monks, even if bandits were to seize you and saw off your limbs one by one with a 2-handled saw, even then you should train yourselves. Our minds will be unaffected. We will speak no evil word. We will remain sympathetic, with a mind of goodwill and with no inner hate. The image is meant to break the listener's complacency. It is not asking for stoic suppression. It is describing a discipline so deep that the cultivated heart can hold goodwill, even at the limit of human cruelty. This is the Buddhist analog to what Father Zosima will call active love. And it is the place where, very surprisingly, the two traditions begin to converge. Karuna, the Pali word for compassion, one of the 4 sublime states, is not a feeling. The commentaries written centuries later, particularly the Visuddhimagga, would describe Karuna as having a near enemy of grief and domestic pity, and a far enemy of cruelty. That distinction is commentarial, not canonical. but it points at something the suttas themselves repeatedly insist on. Karuna is a trained response to suffering. It is what is left when sentiment fails. It is what acts when feeling has been exhausted. Ivan looked at the children, and his heart broke, and he refused his ticket. The Buddha would say, "You were right to look. You were right to refuse the easy account. But there is one more step." What that step is, and how it converges sometimes with Father Zosima's harsh and dreadful answer, is what the rest of this video is about. Chapter 4. What they illuminate. There is a scene in the Brothers Karamazov, Book 2, Chapter 4, that happens before Ivan's rebellion and before the Grand Inquisitor. It is a small scene. Two people in a small monastery cell. A woman has come to see Father Zosima. Her name is Madame Koklakova. She is troubled. She tells him that she loves humanity, that she dreams, sometimes, of selling everything and becoming a sister of mercy, tending the poor and the sick, kissing their wounds. But she has a problem. She is afraid that if the patients did not show her gratitude, if they were ungrateful, demanding, foul-tempered, indifferent, she would begin to hate them. She would not be able to bear it, and then she would lose her love for humanity altogether. She asks Zosima, "What should I do?" He answers gently. He tells her this is the same problem a doctor once described to him. The doctor had said, "I love humanity, but I am amazed at myself. The more I love humanity in general, the less I love people in particular." And then Zosima gives her the answer that runs underneath the entire novel. Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared with love in dreams. Love in dreams is greedy for immediate action, rapidly performed, and in the sight of all. Men will even give their lives if only the ordeal does not last long, but is soon over, with all looking on and applauding as though on the stage. But active love is labor and fortitude, and for some people too, perhaps, a complete science. A complete science. Constance Garnett's translation, which has carried this line for over a century in English. Active love, a discipline, a long, daily, often unwitnessed labor. This is the answer that survives Ivan's rebellion in the structure of the novel. Ivan refuses the harmony. Zosima offers no replacement harmony. He offers a practice. And this is where the convergence becomes visible. 24 centuries earlier, the Buddha had given his monks the same instruction, in a different vocabulary, with different metaphysics, but with the same core. In the simile of the saw we looked at in the last chapter, even if bandits were to carve you up savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, even then you should train yourselves. Our minds will be unaffected, with a mind of goodwill and with no inner hate. He's not describing a feeling. He's describing a trained capacity. Metta, in the Pali, is not a warm sentiment. It is what the suttas call ketavimutti, a release of the heart, cultivated through repeated practice until it can be maintained under provocation that would destroy ordinary affection. And karuna, the response of compassion to suffering, has the same structure. It is not the rush of pity that comes and goes. It is the trained orientation that acts when the rush has died. Both traditions, in other words, arrive at the same observation about what compassion actually is. It is not what you feel when it is easy. It is what you do when the feeling fails, when the gratitude is not there, when the person in front of you, as Madame Koklakova feared, is not the kind of person you can easily love. This is convergent observation, arrived at independently. Dostoevsky did not borrow from the Pali canon. The early Buddhist suttas could not have anticipated a Russian novelist working 2.5 millennia later. Two traditions separated by every accident of history, examining the same human fact, recording the same finding. Compassion is not a feeling. It is a discipline that does what the feeling cannot. There is a second convergence, quieter, but perhaps deeper. It has to do with how truth is delivered when argument fails. Return to the ending of the Grand Inquisitor. The old man finishes his 90-minute case. He has explained the theology of miracle, mystery, and authority. He has prepared the verdict. And the prisoner, silent through it all, does not counter-argue. He approaches. He kisses the old man on his bloodless, aged lips. And that, Dostoevsky writes, is his whole answer. And then, pages later, in the tavern, when Ivan finishes his retelling of the poem to his brother, Alyosha does the same thing. He stands. He goes to Ivan. He softly kisses him on the lips. Ivan, startled. That's plagiarism. You stole that from my poem. 2 kisses. One inside the poem, between Christ and the Inquisitor. One outside the poem, between the 2 brothers. The second deliberately echoes the first. Dostoevsky has built into the structure of the novel itself the suggestion that to Ivan's argument, to that brilliant, devastating, morally serious refusal of the universe, there is no counter-argument. There is only a gesture. The Buddha, in his teaching, reaches for the same recognition in a different way, over and over again. When a propositional answer would mislead, when an abstract account would distort what is being taught, he reaches for a simile. The arrow in the wound, the raft that carries you across the river and is then set aside, the saw at the limit of cruelty. The Pali word for this kind of teaching is upama, a comparison, an image, a story that points at something direct statement cannot reach. Ludwig Wittgenstein, at the end of his Tractatus, wrote a line that has been read alongside both traditions. There are, indeed, things that cannot be put into words. They make themselves manifest. Dostoevsky shows what cannot be argued. The Buddha points, with similes, at what cannot be stated. Different instruments, same recognition about the limits of doctrine. There is a third convergence. And then we come to the disagreements. In Book 6 of the novel, Zosima gives his disciples his final teaching. The line that has become famous, everyone is really responsible to all men for all and everything. That is Garnett. The newer Pavia and Volokonsky translation is more literal. Every one of us is guilty before everyone, for everyone and everything. The Russian word, vinovat, is heavier than responsible. It carries the weight of guilt, of accountability, of being to blame. There is a kind of theological seriousness in the Russian that English softens. How does Zosima get there? Through Christ, through love of the earth. Love all God's creation, the whole and every grain of sand in it. Through the intuition that the boundary between self and other is finally a kind of illusion. The Buddha gets to the same place by a different road. Through dependent origination, Samyutta Nikaya 12, the analysis of conditionality, SN 12.2, and through anatta, the teaching of not-self in Samyutta Nikaya 22.59, SN 22.59. If the boundary between this body and that one is not a fixed metaphysical line, if my suffering and yours arise in the same lawful field of conditions, if the I that would isolate itself is itself a construction, then being responsible for all beings is not a moral exhortation. It is a structural consequence of how things actually are. Zosima reaches it through love. The Buddha reaches it through analysis. They reach the same point. So, 3 convergences. Compassion as trained discipline, not feeling. Truth delivered by gesture and simile when argument cannot reach. Universal responsibility arising from the dissolution of an isolated self. And now the disagreements, honestly stated, not papered over. First, what suffering requires. For Dostoevsky, suffering requires a witness, a God who sees, a resurrection that redeems the tears of the child. Without that witness, Ivan returns his ticket. And Ivan is not refuted in the novel. He is answered by Zosima's practice, not by counter-metaphysics. For the Buddha, the cessation of suffering does not require a witness. The lawfulness of conditions does its work whether or not anyone is watching. Compassion needs no cosmic guarantor. Second, the question of God. For Dostoevsky, the existence of God is the live, agonizing central question, the one Ivan cannot let go of, the one Alyosha must hold against him. For the Buddha, the question is set aside, not because the answer is hidden, but because the demand for the answer prevents the path. This is not the same posture as Ivan's. Ivan is tortured by the question. The Buddha declines its relevance. The difference is substantial. Third, and this is the cleanest disagreement, and we should not soften it. For Dostoevsky, suffering can redeem. The arc of his imagination bends toward resurrection. Anguish, born and transformed, becomes the material out of which a person is remade. For the Buddha, suffering does not redeem. Suffering is real and conditioned, and to be released. Nibbana is not the redemption of suffering. It is the cessation of the conditions that produce it. Dostoevsky's arc bends toward resurrection. The Buddha's bends toward unbinding. These are not the same destination, and it is not a kindness to either tradition to pretend they are. Close. We have spent an hour with 2 men who looked at the suffering of the world and could not look away. One was a Russian novelist who walked out of a mock execution in 1849 and spent 4 years in shackles among murderers with a stolen New Testament under his pillow. The other was a wandering ascetic in northern India 24 centuries earlier who left his palace, sat under a tree and gave his first sermon on dukkha. Different worlds, different vocabularies, different gods or no gods. The same fact at the center of both lives. The suffering of beings is real and undeserved and unbearable to look at honestly. And the same finding, in the end, about what to do with it. Father Zosima told Madame Koklakova, "Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared with love in dreams. Active love is labor and fortitude, and for some people too, perhaps, a complete science. Not a feeling, a practice. Sustained when the gratitude does not come. Sustained when the patient is ungrateful, the child is difficult, the neighbor is impossible to bear. Sustained especially when the warm rush of humanitarianism has gone, and what is left is just this person in front of you, needing something from you that you do not particularly want to give." The Buddha, on the question of how to hold the heart in the face of cruelty, gave his monks the most extreme image in the canon. Even if bandits seized you and sawed off your limbs with a 2-handled saw, even then, train yourselves. Our minds will be unaffected. We will speak no evil word. We will remain sympathetic, with a mind of goodwill and with no inner hate. The image is shocking on purpose. It is meant to break the listener's assumption that goodwill can be a feeling sustained only when conditions permit. Metta and karuna, in the Buddha's teaching, are not feelings. They are trained orientations of the heart. They are what is left when feeling has been exhausted. They are what acts when sentiment has nothing more to give. This is the one thing these two traditions, separated by 24 centuries, by continent, by theology, by everything that ordinarily divides traditions, agree on without qualification. Compassion is not what you feel when it is easy. It is what you do when it is hard, when the feeling fails, when the gratitude is not there, when the person in front of you is, as Madame Koklakova feared, not the kind of person you can easily love. That is the convergence. The divergences are real, and we have named them. Dostoevsky's universe requires a God who sees, a resurrection that redeems, a meaning that justifies the tears of the child. The Buddha's requires none of these. For Dostoevsky, suffering can be transformed into something else. The arc of his imagination bends toward resurrection. For the Buddha, suffering is to be released. The arc of his teaching bends toward unbinding. These are not the same destination, and it would not be a kindness to either tradition to claim that they are. What we are left with then is a kind of stereo hearing. Two instruments examining the same human facts and producing, in different keys, observations that sometimes converge and sometimes do not. The convergence does not prove either of them right. The divergence does not make either of them wrong. What they share is a refusal, the same refusal in both cases, to look away from the suffering of the world, and a recognition that whatever compassion is, it cannot be a feeling sustained in dreams. Even in the tavern, with the newspaper articles in his hand, refused his ticket. He was, in the structure of the novel, never refuted. Zosima did not give him a counter-argument. Zosima gave the woman in the cell a practice, and Alyosha, kissing his brother in the tavern, gave Ivan a gesture. The Buddha, on the other side of the world, would not have argued with Ivan either. He would have done something more disquieting. He would have looked at the same arrow in the same wound, and he would have said, "The question of who shot it can wait. There is something to do first. The path that releases this suffering is here. Begin where you are." Dostoevsky asked, "How can suffering be?" The Buddha said, "It is. Begin there." What they found beginning there in very different directions is the subject of this video and of the longer conversation that continues after the screen goes dark, in whatever silence you carry it into. Thank you for watching.